How do you rescue someone on the other side of the world with nothing more than a cell phone? Scott Mann knows how. This is part 2 of our Afghan evacuation series. This is the story of Task Force Pineapple. Want to keep your dollars and cents? Then download the Sense app from the Office of Financial Readiness. That's Sense, S-E-N, money sign, E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. You can't do any of those things without money. So if you have sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's S-E-N, money sign, E, today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. This is Military Matters. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
Scott Mann retired as a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army's Special Forces. He's been involved in foreign internal defense, counterinsurgency, and stability missions all over the world. But as the Taliban began reseizing power, the fight to survive in Afghanistan would make its way to his very own doorstep.
I was not very happy with the government when I left service. I was not happy with the direction of Afghanistan, and I just didn't want to get involved with it again, to be honest. And it was Nizam reaching out to me when Kabul fell, and he was like, "Brother, I'm not afraid to die, but I don't want to die alone."
Nizam was a former Afghan Army Special Forces soldier that Scott knew through a mutual friend. During the taping of an interview, Scott had asked his buddy James Meek about Nizam and how he was doing. Turns out that Nizam was trapped in the city of Sherbazhan, a trading and transit hub in northern Afghanistan.
That's up in Dostum's territory. Like, that's Uzbeks, man. How the hell is he surrounded that far north? And I got chills, man, as soon as I heard it, because I'm like, that's impossible. Like, there's no way that the Taliban are that far north. Well, they were. And so for me, even, I've worked in that country so long, I was like, if they have established that kind of presence that far north, something is drastically wrong.
As city after city fell back to Taliban control, Nizam had fled from Kabul to his uncle's home in Sherbazhan. Nizam had applied for a special immigrant visa 2 years prior and had tacit approval to move forward with it. But as the Taliban began to re-grip the country, time had run out for Nizam and many others.
It just kind of hit me right between the running lights, man. I was like, I guess this guy's going to get killed. So I called up James and I called up a couple other active duty SF guys, and we started working a remote recovery plan.
Much like Chad Robichaux and the team he assembled to rescue Afghans in country, Scott began leveraging his special operations network.
Using like my relationships with Jamiat Islami, the old Mujahideen network, and how can we move him through, all of these checkpoints and get him to the airfield, get him manifested, how are we going to get him to open the gates? This is early on.
The folks Scott is talking to aren't in Afghanistan for the most part. He's coordinating with other people stateside, from cell phones, working the problem of how to get Nizam through security and his family to safety. And they're doing this from kitchens, cars, and living rooms right here in the U.S.
And that's what we did. Everybody kind of started working different pieces of the problem, but it was all about relationships. It was all about connections. And ultimately we moved him through the city and we got him to the gates. And then his phone was almost out of juice. We'd been up for like 36 hours at this point. We're working off Signal, the encrypted app. Nizam is out 4 feet within the gate, 4 feet from the Marines. And, we're like, all right, tens of thousands of people around him. 2 people had been killed right in front of him. And we're like, good God, man. And we kept asking him to hand his phone to the Marines, and they wouldn't take his phone. They were very, very agitated and on edge, rightfully so. Not a lot of clarity on what was going on.
Imagine the confusion taking place at the gates. In fact, you don't have to try very hard because there's tons of footage of hundreds, if not thousands, of Afghans pressing against the gates while Marines are trying to hold them together. And in that sea of people, Nizam is trying to get one of these Marines to take his cell phone and talk to the American on the other end of that line. But the Marines aren't having that, and for good reason. For all they know, that phone could be a bomb, or they could be an unwitting trigger for a nearby device. At the least, They might be thinking there's another Afghan at the end of that phone call, and what are they going to do about the insane situation that they're facing right now?
Finally, James said, I'm going to try one more thing. And he called one of his buddies who knew a guy on the inside. And it turns out the guy was a diplomat and he was a former SF dude. And when he heard James's description of Nizam and that he was ANASF and that he had gone to the Q course at Bragg, he was like, all right, I'm going to pass the word down to the Marines. Tell him to say pineapple. So we were screaming over the phone, say pineapple, dude. And he did. And a few minutes later, we got a selfie of him inside the wire, and I just like collapsed in the driveway. It hit me. I didn't realize, it was the weight of not just Nizam, but the weight of a lot of that war and friends lost. And I was so terrified, and I didn't even really realize it, that I was going to lose another guy on my watch, God doing what I'd asked him to do. But we didn't. He was in, and we got his family in the next night. And I thought that was it.
Scott had leveraged his contacts to cut through the chaos that was the Kabul airport gates to get one message across that would save Nizam and his family. One word: pineapple. And with that, Nizam was identified for safe passage. Although saving Nizam was important and rewarding, Scott knew that there were still many others just like Nizam trapped in Kabul, trapped all over the country of Afghanistan, watching their country quickly slip back into the hands of the very people they'd been fighting for almost 20 years. Scott began to closely examine the process and the people they had used to save Nizam and began to shape it to become more effective at saving more people.
We're going to need people that can make phone calls inside the perimeter. We're going to need people that can make phone calls to the military, to state, that can rattle some cages. I know Waltz was, Mike and I go way back, and I knew he was already interested in helping, and he was already working it. So I called him and I just said, I think we can do some good here, but I need some help from your office. And so he cut his scheduler to us, and she was amazing. And that gave us, and then James Meek from ABC News. That was another, he had a whole, he had a lot of soldier and warrior contacts, but he also had contacts from years and years of investigative reporting that we could never have had. So it was really the diversity of our team, I think.
As Scott was putting his plan into action, there was one key difference between what he was doing and what Chad Robichaux had been doing.
Put nobody on the ground. That was that was another thing that I was clear about. I was like, we're not putting anybody on the ground. This is the hero in this journey is the Afghan and the Afghan and their family. Like, that's the hero in this journey. We're the guides. We're the shepherds. They're the protagonists. They got to walk this ground. This is not about the Americans going over to save them. Like, we had 20 years to do that. They're going to have to walk this ground. The best we can do is be their eyes and their ears. And that was the role we played. We established that. And the other thing that I told the team was, there's 30,000 people at this airfield. Most of them, while they very much want to get out of that country, they don't meet the criteria for duress and SIV of a commando or an Afghan interpreter or a female judge. We can help. And so if you're a Marine or you're 82nd Airborne or your State Department, how in God's name are you going to know with 30,000 people pressing on a gate? So what we established was our charter is to responsibly present, to assist a person to responsibly present themselves and their family as highly vetted and relevant to that Afghan duress evacuation. And so that was the communication we established on the inside was, hey, we're special operators. We understand the country. We have worked with these people, served alongside these people. If they hold up a cell phone and it's got pineapples on it, they're vetted. And that became like a near recognition signal. Other task force did the same thing, but that became the methodology by which these conductors at the wire could allow people in a vetted way.
With that, Task Force Pineapple was in business, trying to get vetted individuals and their families out of the country while working with officials such as the State Department in order to keep the efforts on the up and up. But that alone presented some daunting challenges, not only to the shepherds, but to the flock.
Our Afghan partners who we are shepherding, they are having to, the State Department sends out an email. They that says, come to the airfield in 30 minutes. Right. And so, they have to go through a Taliban checkpoint where their family or, their wife is beaten, and they're on the phone with our shepherd saying, sir, they're beating my wife right now. Can I fight back? And the shepherd is saying, no, you need to endure it. Get through it. You have to get through it. It's the only way to freedom. They're wading through sewage filled canals. They're going through crowds of 30,000 people with their little children, and they're, some cases getting trampled. They're out in the elements for 19 hours at a time, waiting for a gate to open with no food and no water. So all of those factors were in play, not to mention the fact that none of us really knew when the gates were going to open and when they weren't. It was complete ambiguity. Like, you never knew where you could get in. So what we ended up doing was, we would use the Signal chat room to provide situational awareness in near real time. And the commandos and the Afghan interpreters and the Afghan special forces were disciplined enough to understand that even though they were moving their families with their elderly parents and their little children, they had to be commandos. They had to be, elite, and they had to report. And when they would report, that would allow us to get real-time situational awareness on Abbey Gate. Okay, Abbey Gate's closed. Copy that. Everybody stand by. Oh, wait, North Gate is now open. Okay, I'm moving my flock to North Gate. We're going to posture there. We'll report when we're there. And so it was, and each day that went on, thousands and thousands of more people. The Taliban tightened the noose, and these poor Afghans that were just trying to get their families out were so exhausted, so beat up, so traumatized, moving from gate to gate. It got to the point where our shepherds, their biggest task was to just keep their morale up, just to keep them in the game and not lay down and quit. And unfortunately, some of them did, and they were at Abbey Gate when that bomb went off.
Are you a military spouse? MilSpouse Money Mission educates and empowers those whom service members rely on most. So if you're the household 6, captain of the homestead, leader of the domicile, check out MilSpouse Money Mission from the Office of Financial Readiness. Also, they have an app, Sense app, SEN money sign E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. If the last year taught us anything, it was how important it is to save for a rainy day or a COVID year. So if you have any sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's SEN money sign E today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The bombing at the gate changed everything. It claimed the lives of U.S. service members and halted the process of getting Afghans out of the country. When the process did restart, it was far slower and the security much tighter than before. The sense of desperation was real and palpable. These shepherds were on the phone with their people, living out in real time the danger and death that came with trying to escape the brutality of the Taliban.
I don't know, you don't get over that, you just, but that was I think the big, and on the shepherd side, there was no relief. All of these shepherds that came into the game, these were people that we had served with, we had been to combat with. In many cases, they had saved our lives. We had, the deal. I mean, like, you have an unspoken commitment to each other. And now they're on the phone with them, with their families, and they can hear their wives crying. They can hear their children screaming. And, there's no relief. You've been up 36 hours, 41 hours, and you're looking at things on your phone that you used to look at in a combat zone. Now you're sitting in the kitchen with your children around you, the one place that you had sanctuary. The one place that you could escape from the horrors of that shit is now like there's nowhere to go, and guys are sleeping with their phones on their chest. Everything that we tried to put behind us came back. But whatever, it was like that. That wasn't, it's only now that we're seeing the pain of that. So those were a lot of the challenges. And then once the bomb went off, man, the gates were closed. They welded them shut. They did demo inside, and we had even American citizens sleeping out in the street, waiting for gates to open. And, so all of those things were factors, and trying to keep each other up. That was a lot of my job, I guess, was cheerleader in chief, just trying to remind these guys and girls that they were friggin' awesome and that it was going to be all right. And then trying to believe that myself when I don't know that I did.
These veterans, shepherds, had essentially turned their homes into mini command posts. They were leading evacuation efforts with a cell phone, maybe a whiteboard, and hours upon hours of their time. Morale went up and down, more down than up after the bombing. As we covered in the last episode, the State Department was in charge of the NEO, or non-combatant evacuation operation. Scott has his own feelings about how the State Department handled this responsibility.
State Department they did not have the will or capacity to do what they were charged to do. Mm-hmm. Full stop. They didn't. They didn't have a sense of the situation. They didn't have the SIV program under control, and it had been falling apart for years. They had plenty of warnings, I believe, from the Department of Defense and others about what was coming, and that they needed to accelerate these evacuations in the face of this impending collapse. And they didn't. And then to put them on the ground in Kabul as the proponent of no way. I just, and I also think, and again, I'm still trying to focus on unity, working together, like I really am. But I do think we have to talk about what happened. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that little perimeter around Kabul was being quarterbacked from the West Wing, not Donahue or JSOC or anybody else. And I don't care. I don't give it. I'll say that. I don't think that those commanders were empowered to do what commanders normally do in a NEO. We had bus loads of commandos sitting outside the gate with the engines running. We had bus loads of AMSITs, little children, sitting in buses outside the gate with the Taliban firing over their head and U.S. forces on the other side of the wall 200 yards away. Like, on what planet does that happen in a NEO?
Scott's opinion of how the State Department handled the NEO situation is not unlike the opinions expressed by Nick Palmisano from the last episode, and like Nick, Scott has nothing but the highest regard for the service members tasked with the unenviable duty of carrying out the operation itself.
Oh, I'll tell you right now, I think the men and women that manned that perimeter, they were magnificent. They were magnificent. They did things that were, above and beyond the call of duty. And they all know what a moral injury looks like. And they're like, no, thank you. They did what they didn't give a shit. They did what needed to be done.
You've heard the term moral injury brought up in this story, but what exactly is a moral injury? The National Center for PTSD states that in traumatic or unusually stressful circumstances, people may perpetrate, fail to prevent, or witness events that contradict deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. A moral injury can occur in response to acting or witnessing behaviors that go against an individual's values and moral beliefs. Individuals may also experience betrayal from leadership, others in positions of power, or peers that can result in adverse outcomes. Moral injury is the distressing psychological behavior, social, and sometimes spiritual aftermath of exposure to such events.
Is that you now have these combat veterans who many of them have been severely traumatized, right? Racked with survivor's guilt from a 20-year journey or whatever, because the government did not implement its instruments of power that it had at its disposal. You relegated that damage to these veterans who there was no way for them to win. There was no way for them to achieve the mission. Yeah, we saved hundreds, but we lost thousands, and we're still on the phone with them. How do you hang up the phone? How does this end? How do we come to a place where the government responsibly takes the watch from these veterans who have been conditioned their entire lives to step into the breach when something like this happens? To me, that is what will haunt us, along with just the humanitarian aspect of this. But we have done something to our veterans that I don't think we've ever done before.
Moral injury, PTSD, survivor's guilt. The list of mental health issues can stretch on for everyone involved, from the shepherds to the flock. But regardless of the physical, mental, and spiritual risks, Scott knew that the only way to provide a long-term solution to helping the Afghan people post the evacuation was to create a more stable organization, one that could raise funds for this increasingly costly endeavor.
I do think, and I will stand by this, I do think that the veteran groups in particular, I can only speak to those citizen liaison networks, I think they did a really stand-up job of responsibly presenting highly vetted people in a sea of chaos. I do. And I can whiteboard it. I can show the process. Like, I feel really solid about that. You know, the bumping up against each other, I think, started after the explosion went off, and all of us had to go, okay, now what? And it became this long-term humanitarian evacuation crisis with the Taliban in control of the country. And, you know, what was a volunteer group? Now what are you going to do? You know, like, I got a text. I'm not even kidding you. I was exhausted. It was a few days after the explosion. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with Monty, my wife. And I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I mean, this thing is killing me. And I look at my phone and it says, Scott, it's Mark Milley, call me. And so I texted him and he basically said, we're putting together a private public task force. I'd like you to come to DC and plan with us. It went to the National Security Council. They approved it. They directed State Department to put this task force together. I believe State Department did not follow that directive at all. They entertained some level of connection, but not a task force. But we decided at that point to become a 501c3 and get in the long game. Now, my decision personally was I'll be the interim director, but I'm not going to. I'll be an advisor. I'm not the guy. So I helped get it going, and then Lila Kostani, an Afghan American, it's female led. She is now at the helm of Pineapple and will be, you know, for the foreseeable future.
I can tell you firsthand, having worked with getting a 501c3 off the ground, that it's not easy. Despite the fact that there are tons of charities out there, it's remarkably hard to start one and maintain one.
If you become a 501c3, how long does it take for the IRS to give you tax exempt status? Long time. 6 months, 9 months. That means you can't raise money. And this is an entirely private sector effort. The government's putting no funds into this. So we have people now starving to death. They're predicting 1 million children starve to death in a recent article. They had to leave their homes. If you're a commando or an interpreter, you can't stay in your home because the Taliban have the biometrics and the pay records. So they're going house to house. So you have to leave your house. Winter's coming. No food, no water, no cash, no medical care. So now is where you see groups starting to bump up against each other because they're competing for donors and they're trying to find a way to keep their people alive, moving them to safe houses. How do you even do that? How do you pass money into the country, food, water? There's no humanitarian corridor at all. There's no centralized relief effort. You know, some people are still trying to pay exorbitant amounts of money to get them on flights. So that, I think, and people are exhausted. They're running out of gas. So now you see these groups starting to, you know, like you see in the donor space and 501c3s that, you know, sniff each other's butts and, you know, and start to complain about each other. And that's happening now. And I think that's going to get worse as winter approaches and people continue to get executed.
Task Force Pineapple has helped over 1,000 people leave the country of Afghanistan. They've distributed humanitarian relief all over the country. They've helped move people in and out of safe houses who have become targets of the Taliban, such as members of the LGBTQ community, female judges and lawyers, and Americans. These efforts have been paid for not only through donations, but by the very shepherds themselves, some having cashed in their own 401ks to help with these efforts.
On the positive side, our veterans really showed us the power of leading when nobody else is coming, of not worrying about the bureaucracy or the consequences, and just focusing on honoring a promise and just doing what our parents taught us to do, which is just honor the promises that you make and stand up when nobody else does. And I think I'm so proud of our active duty warriors and the veterans and the civilians who stood up and volunteered when nobody. I think it really restored a lot of trust in this country in some ways and showed us what's possible. And then the final thing that I would say is that a real blow has been dealt to our veteran population, and our government still has a responsibility to help correct that by taking the con on this situation from them in a responsible way that lets them go back to their lives. We have asked them to do something that is unconscionable. That's just, it's reprehensible that what we've asked them to do, and then we still are asking them to do. It's like being on an 85-day 911 call with no relief, and the supervisor whispering in the dispatcher's ear right before the call, just keep their morale up. We're not sending anybody.
We have to point out something very important here, and that this story is missing a critical piece, and that belongs to the service member. No one wants to go on the record and talk about their experience there, and for good reason. Operational security is a major one, of course, but this operation was huge, and everyone had their own particular roles to play. The DoD was working closely with the State Department. Conventional forces were tied in with special operations, and then you add the element of partners, allies, and these veteran organizations, and what you have is a highly charged and very complex political environment that would be difficult to describe to anyone. To better understand the sentiment and perspective of the military in this situation, I would direct you to an episode of Softcast, the official podcast of the U.S. Special Operations Command. On the anniversary of 9/11, they released an episode called Reflecting on 9/11 and Afghanistan. The senior enlisted leader at U.S. SOCOM Command Chief Master Sergeant Greg Smith and the senior enlisted leader for the preservation of the force and family, Sergeant Major Matt Parrish, discussed how they felt as special operations service members and leaders on what had just happened in Afghanistan when they recorded that particular episode. It's a frank and emotional conversation that gives us a glimpse into how the military views what happened there and what is to come. A lot of service members and veterans feel like our withdrawal spells the end of the Afghan people, and that the sacrifices we made were for nothing. But Chief Smith offers a different perspective.
Trust me when I say this, because I felt similar feelings. This is probably the biggest one of my life and my military career, but I felt similar feelings along my career where I'm scratching my head trying to process my not understanding. Did I validate what I've been doing, right? Am I suddenly now, is everything that I've done for the last 20 years invalidated? And the answer is absolutely not.
Right.
I mean, look, not only over that last week, the 124,000 lives that we pulled out of there, but over the last 20 years, and people are going to go, yeah, but now kids aren't going to be able to go to school. And we don't know what the future holds. And we've got to be careful about speculating right now about what tomorrow brings, because we don't know. We can be hopeful and we can be supportive, but
we can be ready.
But recognize that we created an opportunity is what we've done over 20 years.
124,334 people, the largest humanitarian movement in the history of mankind. Politics aside, that is something we can't ignore. What Scott Mann, Chad Robichaux, our military service members, and the many other veterans and organizations, what they've done is without a doubt a testament to the spirit and fortitude of our nation's men and women. We want to thank Scott Mann for sitting down and talking with us about the efforts of Task Force Pineapple. You can learn more about Task Force Pineapple by going to taskforcepineapple.org. Also, huge thanks to US SOCOM Softcast team for allowing us to play a clip from their podcast. Highly recommend you check that episode out, Reflecting on 9/11 and Afghanistan, from Softcast, available everywhere you listen to podcasts. Next week, Jack Murphy brings us an unedited, uncut interview with former CIA paramilitary officer Mick Mulroy in part 3 of our Afghan evacuation series. Mick was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East under Secretaries Mattis and Esper. They discussed the CIA's role in the NEO and what this crisis looked like from his end. This episode was written and edited by Rod Rodriguez. The original interview conducted and recorded by Jack Murphy. Don't forget to check out Stripes.com for all the news that matters to you. Stripes.com, use promo code podcast and get 50% off your digital subscription. That's 50% off your digital subscription. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode. Did you know that the Office of Financial Readiness has an app? Download Sense app. That's SEN money sign E. Sense app has the information you need for saving for retirement, building credit, creating a spending plan, or buying a home. FinRed has the tools you need. Download Sense app for tips on the go and follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.